Greetings YouTube! Cyberpunk 2077's developers, CD Projekt Red, has announced that their development staff will be crunching, despite the fact that they promised twice that they wouldn't. Now I will readily admit at this point, immediately, that I didn't actually know that they made this promise. Apparently they promised this back in May 2019, so over a year ago, and a month after that they made the promise again, so they made it twice. And if I had known ahead of time, if I had known that they had made the promise then, my reaction back then would probably have been something along the lines of yeah, what the fuck ever. It would have just been unbelievable, to say the least. Because there are moments when I genuinely think that the video game, not so much the developers, not so much the low-level staff, because they're the ones having to do it, but certainly the management and definitely the publishers, I sometimes think that they love crunch. Because why do they do it so often? You know what I mean? It's not a surprise that they've done this. For those of you who don't know what crunch is, by the way, I'm just going to quote the definition Kotaku uses in their article I'm reading. Crunch is a term used to describe extended periods of overtime that can last for weeks or months on end, and usually comes towards the back end of a game's development. Once almost universal across the industry, in recent years it has become rightly criticised as an exploitative and anti-worker business practice. I would probably describe crunch more along the lines of, it's kind of like overtime, except that it's mandatory overtime, and almost always you don't get paid overtime pay, you know, like time and a half, because you're working time that you don't normally work, so they pay you a bit extra as an incentive. They don't normally do it. I mean, I occasionally, quite rightly in my opinion, criticise the industry for trying to exploit us, the gamers. But they try to exploit their employees almost as badly, if not more so, sometimes. They have sent out an email to staff, and apparently everyone will be expected to complete your typical amount of work and 1 day of the weekend. So I'm guessing that means an extra 8 hours in practice. The extra work apparently will be paid. So this is like actually getting overtime pay for a fucking change. But yeah, apparently the studio head Adam Badowski, I apologise if I butchered his name, I'm useless with people's names, but he's written in the email to the staff, I take it upon myself to receive the full backlash for this decision. I know this is in direct opposition to what we've said about crunch. It's also in direct opposition to what I personally grew to believe a while back, that crunch should never be the answer. But we've extended all other possible means of navigating the situation. They made a big deal out of this. That's the problem. They made a big deal about how crunch was a bad thing and that how they were going to be more civilized and humane and ethical about it. So the fact that they've made a big deal out of it and then gone back on it, you know what I mean? You know what I mean? This is some grade A fucking bullshit here. Now apparently this crunch period is to address the game's various bugs. I mean, games obviously have bugs, especially when they're complicated. Crunch usually happens because the management has fucked up the management. What I mean by that is the management level personnel have fucked up the act of managing the project. Usually from a time management perspective. I mean, the example that I will always remember, and I don't think feel free to correct me in the comment section. I don't think it's actually to do with crunch, but an example of how complicated it can get, I always remember, is the original God of War 2. And there's a section where I think you're running through either a forest or a marsh or a swamp or something, beating up bad guys as Kratos, Blades of Chaos, yada yada. But here's the thing. I saw a developer video. I can't remember where I saw it. Maybe it was online. I've no idea. But anyway, I saw a developer video where they said, we had this really simple idea. We had this cool idea where we thought, hey, why don't we have Kratos knock down this column? Why don't we have him rocket from side to side and crash it over and he can climb up? Why don't we do that? Wouldn't that be cool? And everyone went, yeah, that's really cool. They were totally unprepared for the amount of work involved, for doing something that is seemingly simple. And yet they had to jump through so many hoops. They had to obviously graphically build the object, the column itself. They had to build it, the various pieces of it, because it collapses and breaks. They had to animate it. They had to make interactions between Kratos and the column. They had to animate both the column and Kratos, because this was a unique animation he doesn't do anywhere else. They had to add in the graphics, they had to add in the sound, they had to make sure they put it in the right place because the rest of the level was built already. They had to go through tons of shit just to make sure that this one column section worked. And they were not ready for it. And I often think that management doesn't appreciate when they happen to make a comment like, oh, by the way, can you just add this into the game? It's only small, it's only simple, can you add it into the game? And you get the distinct impression that in unison, every developer in the entire studio bangs their head on the desk in frustration because there's nothing simple about adding a feature to a game. I've played around with things like the Games Factory and Project Spark, Little Big Planet and Dreams. I've played around with game creation suites before. There is nothing simple about simple. It never is. And often when the management makes simple requests, it doesn't fucking turn out like that. And the developers know it won't. It adds to the runtime of the project. Because that little thing suddenly takes an extra 3 months, which means the project gets pushed back. Except, of course, that the project doesn't get pushed back. Because the publishers immediately go, no, you can just work a bit harder. You don't need an extra 3 months, do you? Not really. You can just work a bit harder, can't you? You can work through. And then, of course, that doesn't happen. And then the studio is up against a massive deadline when they're only a month or two away from release. Cyberpunk 2077 is due for release in midway through November, in time for the PS5 release. I mean, it's a PS4 game, but you're going to be able to have a free upgrade to the PS5 version. So it's a big deal for it to hit its deadline. And something must have happened in the game's development. They've underestimated the amount of time required, and so now they're having to crunch. They're having to dial up everybody's hours in the mad scramble to the finish line, and it is way too fucking common. As I said before, I complain about video game publishers in particular taking advantage of the gamers, but the development staff get screwed over pretty fucking badly as well. I'm definitely of the opinion that until the current generation grows up to be old enough to be in charge of things like the country and the law, nothing's going to change. Because at the moment, the generation that's in charge of the country and the laws are all old bastards. And they've never played a computer game ever. And hell, even if you do play computer games on a regular basis, if you don't keep up with the background news, you won't know about any of this stuff. So even players might not know. It takes something massive, cataclysmic, like EA's release of Star Wars Battlefront 2. That's when it hits mainstream. That's when politicians take notice. But I think that once the current video game generation gets old enough to actually be in a position to make some of the laws, to be more tech savvy, to be more aware of what the video game industry is actually like and how fucked up it is, I don't think anything's going to change. And the workers on Cyberpunk 2077 have my sympathy, because it's not their fault. It's almost certainly management's failing, and it's the workforce that's having to pay for it.